Our top story this hour, a bloody conflict between the government and rebel forces in the second largest African nation might be easing. The Ethiopian parliament has voted for an early end to a 6-month state of emergency effective immediately. Diplomats who are mediating between the two sides are cautiously optimistic. Ethiopia imposed a state of emergency in November 2021. This came after Tigray forces invaded two other regions and threatened to take over the capital. In December, government forces pushed the Tigrayan forces back. The government detained citizens without charge and searched homes without a warrant. Thousands of Tigrayan civilians were held in prisons and warehouses. The decision to lift the state of emergency came 3 weeks after cabinet approval. Out of 312 lawmakers, 63 opposed the motion, 21 abstained. A government official told lawmakers that the state of emergency was restricting tourism, economic activities, thereby causing more damage. However, opposition leaders say that lifting of the state of emergency to please the diplomatic community was premature. Ethiopia is currently facing worsening humanitarian situation. A state-appointed rights commission pointed out that some human rights were not being upheld after the emergency was imposed. Detainees included elderly people, mothers and children. Police deny targeting any ethnic group, saying that they only targeted suspected supporters of the Tigray People's Liberation Front. The TPLF has dominated Ethiopian politics since before Abiy Ahmed came to power back in 2018. Afterwards, relations between the two sides took a major hit and war erupted in November 2020. The United Nations has said that it believes that international mediators are making progress. The United States, on the other hand, has welcomed Ethiopia's decision to lift the state of emergency. Washington has urged the Ethiopian government to promptly release people detained during the conflict. In December, a rights organization said the Tigrayan civilians had been attacked, killed in the conflict. People allegedly faced life-threatening conditions, including torture, starvation and denial of medical care. It alleged that Ethiopian government-aligned forces had subjected Tigrayan women and girls to rape, gang rape, sexual slavery, sexual mutilation and other forms of torture. And for more on this, Koleta Wanjohi is now joining us live from Addis Ababa. Koleta, thank you so much for joining us. The Ethiopian parliament has voted for an early end of the state of emergency. What can you tell us about the situation on the ground, though?
Well, the lifting of the state of emergency is probably a show of confidence by the government on its own security apparatus, on its own security systems. After its own analysis, the Council of Ministers about a week and a half ago decided that it was time to lift the state of emergency and allow life to go on as normal, quote unquote. And that means that the government has some confidence in the measures it has put in place to ensure that at least areas are not affected by the conflict. We know the conflict still continues in the northern region. We still have fighting, especially between the TPLF, which has declared its own offensive against the neighboring region in Afar, where it says it is fighting its own enemies, you know. So fighting continues in the northern region, but on this other side, the government says it will try its best to ensure that normalcy returns.
Right, and what is the general consensus on ground lifting the state of emergency this early? Some say that this is premature.
Yes, it depends on who's looking at it. I mean, we've seen some citizens saying that why lift the state of emergency now, and yet the conflict has not really been pacified. We've not seen the region being pacified with continued fighting, with continued challenges as far as humanitarian access is concerned. The latest being from the WHO saying that it has airlifted supplies, medical supplies into the Tigray region, but there's no fuel within the Tigray region since about August last year, and it cannot distribute these medical supplies to health centers, you know. So there is still some of these challenges. Some people saying that probably it would have stayed longer, but others saying that putting a state of emergency has also put some people as victims, you know, people who've been forced maybe to be arrested or to be detained under the state of emergency, some saying it was really unfair. Right. So it's now up to the government probably to look at it. And also for the government, it's kind of a preamble to what it says, a national dialogue, which is needed, especially to ensure that this conflict between the TPLF and the government and other parties is really done away with.
Right, also had mentioned the humanitarian situation on ground earlier. What can you tell us about that? How do you see the situation unfolding from here on?
Well, if we go according to what the United Nations says, it says about 9.4 million people in the northern region, and those are about 3 regions, that is the Tigray region itself and the neighboring Amhara and Afar regions. About 9.4 million people still need emergency assistance, you know. So some humanitarian agencies saying there is a challenge in terms of accessing, especially the Tigray region, probably one because of the ongoing fighting between the TPLF especially and the Afar region on the other side, and also humanitarian agencies saying, talking about security and safety, you know. So continued fighting means humanitarian assistance is not reaching people. Humanitarian agencies are showing desperation here and there, and they're asking for unfettered access into some of these regions. But above all, we've seen the United Nations, the African Union, the international community, and even citizens here saying that it's probably time for a solution. And the government is talking national dialogue. We're yet to see what kind of format the national dialogue will take, how inclusive it will be, and when it will begin.
Right. All right, Coletta, thank you so much for joining us with all your updates on that. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.